Hello and welcome to Keeping It Young podcast, conversations about marriage, family, and ministry life. I'm Dave.
And I'm Bethany.
And we are the Youngs.
And we're glad that you've joined us again for our series in the book of Proverbs. We're doing a mini series on making sure your children are protected in their influences.
And ladies and gentlemen, I hope you have enjoyed this series and that you are doing well wherever you're joining us from. And, you know, we've put a lot of effort and time into this series and I hope you will take the time to like it. If at all possible, leave us a rating here and there. It does help us in the podcast world if you leave us a rating. And of course, you know, we're always available. We podcast. This is not the only thing we do. Of course, I'm an evangelist. Bethany travels and speaks. I travel and speak. Our family travels together and speaks. And we do a lot of writing. And counseling. Our ministry is very full. The days are very full. But we would be really honored and happy to hear from you. And if we can help you in some way, please reach out to us. Do like and share, though. Take time to tell a friend about the podcast. Maybe do so today. Who could you share a podcast with?
Yes.
And of course, if we can be a blessing, please just take the time. You can find us at the keepingityoungpodcast.com. We are on Instagram. We are on Facebook. We're on the X world, what used to be called Twitter. And you can find us at our personal website, evangelistdaveyoung.com. We are in the middle of this series, Happy Life and Happy Family. Many of you were with us when we talked about we have to emphasize righteousness. We have to emphasize diligence. We have to emphasize God's blessings. We have to emphasize integrity. We have to emphasize the value of our words. And over the last 2 weeks, we have to emphasize the blessings and dangers of influence.
And really, when you look at it in a nutshell like that, it can seem a little overwhelming and think, I have to train my children in all of this in order for us to have a happy, successful family. It can be daunting, but this is just practical everyday life as you're walking through life, just like the book of Deuteronomy teaches us. As you're walking through life, these issues will come up, whether it has to do with God's blessings or righteousness or influences or integrity, and you just teach as you go.
And there's a couple of truths we wanted to share with you. One being that, if you remember, the best influences are those that impart righteousness and wisdom. We talked about that adults are better influences than peers. We talked about the fact that we have to protect our children from lousy friends.
Yes.
And we spent a long time on that one. And we ended last week by just talking about that sometimes we have to be willing to be drastic as long as we have the power to do it. Our children's future depends on it. Because the Bible says, he that walks with wise men shall be wise, but a companion of fools shall be destroyed. So we need to think about that. We're going to close out this session today, this particular little theme on influence, with just a reminder that we have to protect our children from all foolish influences. And there's a couple we want to highlight for you, especially the internet, social media, music, and movies.
Yes.
And all of these have great blessings to them. Social media is such a wonderful tool. The internet is an incredible technological advancement. Music has always been a part of life. And movies, what a privilege that God has let us live in the generation to where we can learn from movies, where we can have time to relax, where we can have time. It is really amazing how blessed we are.
Oh,
isn't
yes.
it?
Absolutely.
Just overwhelming. But we do need to be very cautious that we are protecting our children from these influences. And the internet is a huge one.
Yes.
And to get us started, there's just several things I wanted to draw your attention to. And one was an article that was written in these. I often follow access.org. And the other one about young minds. I can't remember the whole phrase there. And I'll have to find that and share it with you here on the platform. But one of these websites published an article recently, and it basically says in an era where nearly 40% of kids ages 8 to 12 are actively engaged on social media platforms, we have to reevaluate the age of introduction.
Isn't that amazing? Because I think most social media sites have a minimal age.
They do.
Don't they?
They do.
So that parents allow their children to lie.
Yes. In fact, this particular article said this: due to the evolving research, we recommend a minimum of 16 years old before introducing your child to social media. And so the question was, okay, why? And there were several reasons. One was because social media influences identity development. Dr. Murthy, who is the U.S. Surgeon General under President Biden, meticulously compiled numerous studies in his recent advisory on social media. He raised alarm bells all over the place about the profound risk of harm to the mental health and well-being of children and adolescents. In an interview with CNN, he said, and I quote, "Early adolescence is a time where kids are developing their identity, their sense of self. It's a time where it's really important for us to be thoughtful about what's going on and to how they think about their self-worth and their relationships, and the skewed and often distorted environment of social media often does a disservice to many of those children." He even stated that based on the data, the age of 13 is too early. He says, and I quote, "If parents can band together and say, as a group, we're not going to allow our kids to use social media until 16 or 17 or 18 or whatever age they choose, that's a much more effective strategy in making sure your kids don't get exposed to harm early." End of quote. Now, this is not a Christian. Dr. Murthy is a politician.
Yes.
The U.S. Surgeon General. This goes on. So the first thing they said was we have to be careful about the influence of internet because it affects identity development, but also because it affects brain development. And the chief science officer for the American Psychological Association, Mitch Prinstein, co-authored a long-term study on adolescents' neural development and social media use and published it in an article. The study's findings suggest that checking social media repeatedly among young teens aged 12 to 13 is associated with changes in how their brains development. The brains of adolescents who check social media often, more than 15 times per day, became more sensitive to social feedback. The average person spends 2 hours and 27 minutes on social media a day. Teens get as many as 237 notifications a day on their phone. So he said in his written testimony to the United States Senate Committee on Judiciary, and here's a quote, "Developmental neuroscientists have revealed that there are two highly critical periods for adaptive neural development. One of these is the first year of life. The second begins at the outset of puberty and lasts until early adulthood from approximately the age of 10 to 25 years of age. This latter period is highly relevant as this is when a great number of youths are offered relative unfettered access to devices, unrestricted and unsupervised use of social media and other online platforms." And he warned, "Our research demonstrates that checking behaviors on social media could have long-standing and important consequences for the adolescent's neural development," which is critical, he says. And he goes on CNBC to say, "I certainly don't think anyone under 13 should be using social media. Unfettered access without any screen controls or parental monitoring, that should probably be delayed until at least 16. Is this not amazing?
It is.
And so there's a problem we have here with our identity development, our brain development. But then the article goes on to list, those aren't the only additional or the only negative impacts. Here are additional ones. The internet and social media lead to sleep deprivation, which always affects our mental health and physical health negatively. Access to porn. As far as we can tell, nearly or every social media platform contains explicit content. Children exposed to such content at a young age develop distorted views of both sexuality and human relationships. There's also the idea of harmful content. Social media feeds are riddled with cyberbullying, profanity, and hate speech. Young users cannot mentally or emotionally face these harms. In fact, most adults can't. There's addictive algorithms. Dr. Murthy, our Surgeon General, points out that social media platforms are designed to be addictive, and it makes it an unfair battle for children to be pitted against the world's best product designers. Replacing parental controls is the other negative influence. Officer Gomez, a respected figure in child safety, warns that social media can replace parental roles. Excessive time spent on these platforms can lead children to being influenced by values that may not align with family values. And then here's the last thing I'll read from this article. He says this is Officer Gomez, "Social media replaces family values with values parents may or may not agree with." And I mentioned this in our first series on influence. He says, if your teen is on social media 4 to 10 hours a day, that's the national average, that pretty much means somebody else is raising your children. Please keep in mind that there are research facilities calculating the best ways to keep your teen addicted to social media. My strong advice is that you wait as long as possible before introducing your kids to what will likely become some level of addiction. End of quote. So all this to say, this is an influence area where we have to use great wisdom as moms and dads in our society.
Absolutely.
We have, and I think I'm right about this, we have always held our children off till the age of 17.
Yes, and only then based on their maturity level.
Yes, and that you turn 17 is not a guarantee that you get to use the internet or social media. It is the first potential for you to use the internet and social media.
Right, and as long as they're in late high school and college, we reserve the right to take them off of social media.
Yes. So let's talk about the internet just a little bit here, and then we'll talk about social media. When it comes to the internet, there's a few suggestions, Bethany, I would make. How do you protect your children from these foolish influences? Well, have them use the internet only when they are supervised.
Right. It should always be in an open area. There should never, with a closed door and they just have unlimited access.
Never, ever, ever alone.
Right.
Never. Even maybe make this a rule, moms and dads. The internet cannot be used just for fun. So it would only have to be used on purpose. That's a very difficult one in our generation because the internet is our entertainment.
Right. You can scroll YouTube, you can look up how-to videos and all kinds of things like that.
So you have to be very careful. At the minimum, only when supervised. Teach our children not to use it just for boredom. When I'm bored, have nothing else to do. Mm-hmm. So I would say, first of all, make sure you put up some protections. There's a program called Gryphon, Gryphon, that filters all the internet coming into your house, and you give permission for each device that's using the internet. And you also can get records for each device so that you would know by looking it up on their program what has been used. We use Covenant Eyes for the same reason. It's a similar one. Mm-hmm. And that even goes on our children's phones and our computers and our iPads. Bethany and I have tried to make it a real point in our life that we frequently check our children's phones and computer histories.
Yes.
And when our children get into junior high school, because they often at that point begin being, out with other people, maybe on a youth group night, going out to eat or going somewhere with the youth department, we felt like they need a phone at that point. So we give them locked down phones when they are younger.
Right.
And primarily when they're in the youth group, they get a locked down phone. It means they cannot use the internet on that phone, but they can use apps. So we use Marco Polo.
Right.
We use messaging. And there's even those you have to be careful about because some of the apps have access to the internet as a backdoor.
Right.
So we are continually checking phones. We set limits, like our children, basically at bedtime, the phone then shuts down. So all you can do is message, and then we even choose who they can message after bedtime. And moms and dads, if you don't know how to do that, it's time to do research. Mm-hmm. You should. If you have a child with a phone, and they have no controls on that phone. You haven't set how much time they can be on social media, how much time they can play a video game, when the phone shuts down so that they cannot be on it, who they can and cannot text. Moms and dads, I say this gently, but you're failing to protect your children from wrong influences. And your children will be influenced by the internet. And most often, according to every statistic in every place it's been given and tested, most often the internet will influence your children negatively more than positively. There are very few examples of it doing it positively. It is designed to influence our children negatively.
And don't swallow the lie that, well, that's their phone, that's their computer. I don't have a right to that. That's theirs. They have a right to their privacy. They live in your house. You have a right to know what's going on in your house, even if it's on a technological device. And that is your child. You need to direct them, train them in the way they should go. And if they have bad influences coming in on their technological device, then you need to stop it.
And I'm going to just remind you, moms and dads, as well, there is nothing private about the internet. So a lot of parents will say, well, I don't want to check my kid's phone because that's their private. It's not private. It is public and it is owned by the internet world. Every digital footprint your children leaves is available and can be found and used against them if it's something that profits those who are evil. And so don't think in terms of, well, this is private, so I can't do it. We have found that in checking their phones and computer histories, that often it's good to schedule it, but also to keep it random and sometimes to make it a surprise.
Yes.
The surprise checks have occasionally found something that we had to deal with. And it is better to deal with things when they are small than to wait for them to become huge issues down the road, sometimes that are even legal. Because sometimes children stumble into a world of child pornography or some such. And whereas they were not meaning to do wrong, yet they were breaking international laws or state laws. And sometimes it has gotten into massive legal ramifications for a child. Moms and dads, we're saying, when the Bible says, he that walketh with wise men shall be wise, but a companion of fools shall be destroyed, one of those foolish companions can be the internet.
Yes.
And we also have to talk about social media. Now, that's kind of a same idea.
Right. And we went into that into some depth when you were just quoting from
but
that
let's
article.
just be practical, moms and dads. Remember, the point of the articles is that none is always best.
Yeah.
When it comes to social media, none. And the question is, well, how do you do that in a world like ours? Well, you have to get other parents to join you. You have to get your school on board. And if you can't get other parents to join you and you can't get your school on board, you have to teach your child to stand alone.
Right.
My boys, our children would go with me to teen camps. And they would, in those days, would have a flip phone. And there were teenagers all the time that was like, are you serious? You have this old phone? Our boys and our daughters had to learn to stand alone. Mm-hmm. Teenagers like, can we have your MySpace account? Can we have?
Well, MySpace really dated you there, baby.
But our children had to deal with MySpace. The idea was, well, no, I don't have that.
Right. And even now, Charity, she will be 16 this year, but often at camps or teen activities or churches, people will say, oh, can I have your Instagram account? I want to request to follow you. And she'll say, I don't have Instagram.
And moms and dads, don't let that bother you, because remember Daniel in the Bible who stood alone. Daniel, who was so mightily used of God and really was one of the most powerful leaders of his day, was a man who stood alone. He purposed in his heart not to defile himself. There's nothing wrong with your children standing alone. And what do you do? What do you do? How do you do it? And what to do if you do it? Maybe even make the idea, when the time comes for the social media, make it a rite of passage. We have a friend that his children have to write a paper about the influence and dangers of social media and why they think they're ready for it and what plan they are willing to put into action to protect themselves. So they write a paper on it. I read in one article, there's many who are now signing an agreement with their children that I'm going to get on social media, but you have access to my account. Make your kids read a book and read it with them. The Tech Wise Life, My Tech Wise Life. There's 2 different books there. There's a book out called Ways Your Phone is Changing You. Make your children read so that they are aware of the dangers, that they are aware. Read with them the foundings of the U.S. Surgeon General and look up how devastating things can be. And in light of social media, let's say a word or two about TikTok here, because TikTok is, by every evaluation, dangerous and damaging. I mean, our governments around the world are debating about TikTok. And I think TikTok can be challenging because it damages our young people emotionally and relationally, and can be legally damaging. That's why the government is dealing with it. Mm-hmm. And it also certainly damages purity. Instagram is the same way. Instagram is a wonderful tool, but it does have a lot of inappropriate things on it. A lot of cussing.
Yes.
A lot of immorality. There's porn on all of these sites. Moms and dads, social media is a foolish influence. We must protect our children. And there's a couple other areas here as we start winding this down. What are the other areas we ought to be aware of?
Well, music and movies, just more media access that our children could have. Music is so available. You know, when we were teenagers, you had to go buy the cassette tape if you wanted to listen to a certain thing.
Did you have a Walkman?
I didn't. My parents didn't buy me one. They didn't feel like I needed it. We had a big old radio in our house, and my mom often played either, of course, sacred music, but we also had a lot of classical music in our household. So that's what we
I remember
listened
the first time I came to your parents' home, your mom was playing classical music, and I'd never been to a home that people play classical music.
It's beautiful. But nowadays, music is so available on all of the platforms. You know, you've got Apple and iTunes, and you've got Spotify and all these different things. Your child could have in earbuds and listening to who knows what. So you do have to have those conversations where you just sit down and you say, this is what is good music, and this is what makes it good music according to the Word of God. This is music that will damage you. And there is a lot of music out there, parents. You need to believe that there is music that will damage you. I know that maybe you could listen to certain genres of music and it be no big deal because it doesn't talk about anything that would be of a immoral manner, or it doesn't have cussing in it, it doesn't have profanity, it doesn't have rebellion in it, and that's fine and good. You don't always have to listen to sacred music. Our children know that, but your children should know there's music out there that can damage you and damage your heart and your walk with God.
Sure. So Beth and I would recommend moms and dads, when it comes to this influence, the idea of music and movies, discuss standards and set standards, have standards. Discuss them with your kids, and don't be so hard and fast about it that you can't discuss it.
Right.
Standards are not inspired, they are to help. Mm-hmm. So find what helps for your family and say, this is our line, this is our standard. And if one of your kids wants to discuss a different, could we change that? Teach them how to even talk about it.
Right.
And, there are times in our family where we've come to the conclusion of saying, you know what, this may not be wrong, but this is what Daddy prefers. So we're going to do it Dad's way.
Right.
And that's okay, because your kids will be on their own someday and then they can decide. Mm-hmm. But we need to have standards. We need to talk through matters continually. Mm-hmm. We need to offer biblical wisdom continually. And here's a good, just a reminder. Remember that nobody can handle a diet of unbiblical thinking communicated via music. They can't handle that without being tarnished by it.
Right.
So this is important. Movies are the same way. Be careful. In our family, we never watch a movie without first evaluating it. Mm-hmm. We want to know when we watch a movie, before we watch a movie, what are we going to see?
Right.
Or is there cursing? Mm-hmm. Is there foul, is there wicked scenes?
You can look up any movie that has been released. If it's already been released, you can look up any movie via IMDb. You can look at the Parents Guide. This is a secular site, but they will tell you exactly what cuss words are used. They will tell you what scenes are used in that movie. They will even tell you about violence or philosophies that are in that movie that may be unsettling to young children. So that's a website that we use. I know that Focus on the Family also has a website dedicated to telling parents exactly what's in a movie. And those are great things to look up.
And I would even go so far as to tell you in a personal way here, we wait for movies, almost always, we wait for movies to be available via Vidangel or on Clearplay.
Yes.
And sometimes that's a little annoying because everybody else has seen a movie that we haven't seen.
Right.
But because of some words or because of some scenes that aren't always explicitly wicked, but just problematic for our family standards, mm-hmm. we can wait till they're available on Vidangel. Now, if you're not familiar with Vidangel, you should look it up. It's been an investment in our family. We have to budget for it every month. It's not hugely expensive, but it does cost.
Right.
But it has permitted us to be able to always make sure that we have everything removed from a movie that concerns us. And then we have occasionally watched a movie that we wanted to see, but it had a word or two in it. And we can do that via Clearplay to where that removes that word. So that's
right.
not part of our family.
Because not everything is available on VidAngel. And so Clearplay does bring up the rest.
And just that you can watch it on VidAngel or Clearplay doesn't mean that you should. It just is a tool. This is just a tool. And one of the things, moms and dads, that I find everywhere I research about successful parenting is the value of talking and talking and talking and talking about influence. If you don't talk frequently with your kids about social media, there's an organization called Axis, AXIS.org, that weekly publishes articles with things you can talk about with your children. it reminds you of here's the newest song, here's the lyrics in that song, here's the newest movie, and here's the newest situation. And it just reminds you of things, and it gives you questions to get a conversation started. Moms and dads, Beth and I want you to know that one of the most important things you can do to have a happy life and a happy family is to be very aware of the blessings of good influences and very cautious of the dangers of bad influences.
Yes.
And I hope you've enjoyed these 3 weeks, and I hope you've learned from them. I don't know how to say it with the depth of emotion and feelings that it is to us. This is such a vital area.
And you know what? Often we can tell in our children's lives if something's not quite right, if they're being influenced in a way they shouldn't be, if our child has maybe a bad attitude or they are withdrawn in some way. We know, okay, there might be a bad influence. We need to check up on the Spotify account. What have they been listening to? We need to check up on their phone. What have they been seeing? Are they texting a friend who is being a negative influence on them? And so your children will give you those little flags of, okay, something's not quite right. And it's not something to totally fall apart about, parents. You don't fall apart. You just rally the troops, as you might say. You and your husband get together and say, okay, this has been a bad influence in our child's life. How can we overcome it?
Absolutely. Now listen, if you have questions or comments or maybe a statistic you want us to be aware of, we would love to hear from you. Please send any of that to us, reach out to us. We are so excited to continue going in this series because coming up, we're going to be talking about everything from anger to alcohol to the Proverbs 31 woman, just all kinds of exciting areas yet to discuss about how to have a happy life and a happy family. So thanks for joining us. We are happy to have you on board today, and we look forward to being with you next week as well. Hope you have a great week ahead, and whatever else you do, hope you'll serve the Lord with gladness.
The Keeping It Young podcast is a Bax 5 Media production.